For the last 2 years, George and I have been talking about reviving the memory of Gudrun Corvinus, not just as a look back at a fine personality, but to give momentum for the study of prehistory, of what is today Nepal, for the future. And for that, the best thing to do was to have a discussion and have a lecture which would place Gudrun Corvinus firmly in the Nepali radar scope, and yet give momentum to what she had set out to do when her life was tragically cut short. I will not tell you more about George, other than to say that the term polymath tends to be used lightly, without too much forethought. But in my personal estimation, George is a world-class polymath, and we are proud that someone like him takes an interest in Nepal, in the Himalayan languages, in Limbuan and the history and the linguistics of Limbuan, in the history and the linguistics of Nepali or Khas Bhasa, in the people of Nepal. And so he brings a particular academe into our discourse, which I think uplifts all of us. And finally, he is also a Chiako Manche. He wrote a heavy tome that, for its high cost, I have not been able to get my hands on, published by Brill, but it is the story of tea. So as you can see, the polymath, that is George Van Driem, and without any more words from me, the lecture will be about an hour, and this is a fine, eclectic crowd. People from across the spectrum of Kathmandu's genuine intelligentsia, people who work deeply and interest in prehistory, to others who want to know prehistory, given that there is so much narrative in Nepal about prehistory. And this comes at a time when Nepal's own recorded history, for whatever its weaknesses, is being denigrated. And we have in the past decade or so been evolving as a history-less society. So what better way to get back to history than to get back to prehistory?
Namaste, Your Excellencies, दाजुभाइहरू, दिदीबहिनीहरू, साथीहरू, ladies and gentlemen, friends, namaste. Thank you for inviting me. Actually, the idea for the talk does come from Hannah, because he did notice something that I wrote a number of years back, in which I talk not only about her work, the work of Gudrun Corvinus, but also about her life, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. Yesterday, I had the privilege of having dinner with a lady who knew her very well, and the striking thing, two striking things that she said about Gudrun, because she met Gudrun frequently, was her Lebensfreude. In English, I believe that's joie de vivre, which means the joy of life. You're enjoying life. She was always happy, and she would be dancing to music, and when there was no music, she would be telling about her work and dancing in the process with enthusiasm. And the other thing was that the lady could not believe Gudrun's date of birth. Ladies don't like to talk about how old they are, but she couldn't believe Gudrun's date of birth, because she said that would mean that she is older than me, but 15 years older than me. That's not possible. But someone who looked very young and was full of life and looked very good for her age. So this is a tribute to her and to her work. So it's not a typical topic for me, because I'm talking about this person, and I want to see if I can move. Yes. The talk consists of two parts. The first part is about her birth, career, and death, and in its historical context. I think that's very important, because when I teach students at university, I am surprised again and again by the fact that they, because they are born so recently, these students, and you will know it if you have children, they cannot imagine the world before internet. And when they ask certain questions, you see by the nature of the questions that they ask that they do not understand what the world was like before internet. When we talk about the life of someone who was born so long ago, and some of us were born that long ago, then it is helpful to refer to the historical context. So I will do that. Also so that we better understand her. First of all, I want to talk about where Gudrun was born. This is this picture on the left shows where Polish was spoken in Europe after the First World War. And if you know your boundaries, your current boundaries, this Polish-speaking region stretches well into what is now the Ukraine here, and Lvov, and here, but it does not really stretch into this currently western part of Poland, because Polish was really not very much spoken in what is currently western Poland. So this is the map of Poland now, and this is Poland historically, and Lvov here was a Polish city from 1349. It's now in the Ukraine. So and until the Soviet invasion of 1939, it was part of Poland. So it's in the aftermath of the Second World War, the borders changed. So where was Gudrun born? She was not born in Poland, because there's a really beautiful piece. One of the many sources about her life is a piece that was written by two Indians, Patan and Chauhan, in Quaternary International, a few years after she died, and it begins with she was born in Poland. This is untrue. She was not born in Poland. But the piece by Chauhan and Patanaik is a good piece, and there's lots of valuable information in it. There's only one or two inaccuracies, but it's a piece that can be highly recommended. It's one of the sources of her life. This is a map of German settlements historically. I'm not German, by the way, so I'm allowed to do this. So, this is, you see Germans spread all along the Baltic coast and here into Silesia. And here you see German settlements and presence through history. And here it says Deutsche Siedlungen und geographische Ausbreitung im Laufe der Geschichte. In German, this is also interesting because this script is called the Schwabacher typeface, or the Frakturschrift, and books in German are traditionally set in this typeface, and books in Czech, Bohemian, are also traditionally set in this typeface, and that stopped. That's also interesting. And why did it stop? I'll tell you, because you may be surprised. Because in the West, meaning the Netherlands, Holland, France, England, this script was not used, this Frakturschrift, but it was used for typeface in Germany for centuries. See if I've learned to press the right button. After the Second World War, the Germans lost. The Soviets were in the east, the Allies were in the west, and the Germans said, you're going to pay for the war with territory. So they lost a lot of territory, and lots of the other borders, including Ukraine and Poland and everything, were changed by the Soviets. On the western side, but none of you are perhaps that old to remember, but in 1946, even on the Dutch side, there were voices saying the Germans should pay with territory. This area around Emmerich to Cologne, that should be part of the Netherlands. But the Allies said, no, let's not do that. They're doing this in the east, but let us not try to claim German territory. This is only going to make problems for the future. So the Allies in the West did not do this, but they thought about it. At least there were voices raised in support of it. So this is traditionally, historically German territory. It has been for centuries. Moving on. Here we see a map of the German Empire in 1871, so Prussia and the German Empire. And here you see the flag of Prussia, and here you see the flag of the German Empire. So the German Empire stretches throughout what is today Germany, and quite far into the east. But this area here, this is Pomerania, or Pommern, where Gudrun was born. This is the coat of arms of Pommern. So this is part of Germany historically, where German was also spoken. German culture thrive. However, when Gudrun was born, and Gudrun was born here, it says Gudrun Corvinus, again in this Frakturschrift or Schwabacher typeface, in Stettin in Pommern. So in Stettin in Pomerania, where this arrow takes you, here, and this is Pomerania, this is the flag of the Weimar Republic. And then on the 30th of January, she was born on the 14th of December 1931, and again it was Connacht's idea that we host this talk, and we were trying to host it last year. Last year means that it would have been exactly in time for her 90th birthday. That was our intention. But now it is in time for her 91st birthday. But you see, because of COVID and other things, it did not take place last year. So on the 30th of January, of course, the Weimar Republic was taken over by the National Socialist Party of German Workers, and the flag was replaced by this flag. And then you're wondering, what is this date? It's the 3rd of January 1941. An interesting date, because on that day, this Nazi party decided that this typeface that the Germans had been using for centuries, that this was no good because it looked like the letters that the Jews were using. And therefore it should be abolished. So the reason that German is now written in the same typeface as Dutch and French and English is a decision taken on the 3rd of January 1941, and Erlass des Reichsführers. So it was a command, a declaration of Adolf Hitler himself. So the reason that if you read now the Spiegel, and it's not in this typeface, it's Adolf Hitler. Actually, it should be German. I vouch, if you read books in this, it's so much more pleasant. Excuse me, once you get used to it. That's tea. You can't cry about spilled tea. So anyway, that also is something I think is worth thinking of. So Gudrun, let's look at her age here. She was 2 years old when the Nazis took over. She lived through the war, and then of course, I guess she didn't notice the Frakturschrift disappearing. But then after the war, she went to West Germany, because she is now, if we look on the map, after the war, Germany was divided into two. Not to mention all of the parts of Germany that got locked off. So East Germany was, under the communists, and you could not travel freely. And this was West Germany, and she is from an area that is actually east of here, but she studied in the West, in Bonn, over here. And then afterwards she studied in Tübingen, which is down here. So here's where she studied, and in 1961 she became a paleontologist. She completed her total study in paleontology, and so she was totally educated. So it's 1961, it's a long time ago, but not for all of us. So, press the right button, yes. What did she do after she had her degree? She moved to Gujarat, and here is Gujarat, and she conducted field work in Gujarat. And she did so also together with her husband, whom she married, Dr. Anand Dinkar Karve. And their marriage lasted until 1971. He is still a famous archaeologist, paleontologist, prehistorian, Dr. Karve in Gujarat. And he is old, he married again, he has children from his second marriage. But during this period, she had developed a very close tie with India. And not only with Gujarat, but with Pune, which becomes important later in her life. So, she conducted fieldwork during the time of her marriage, here in this area, on the Pravara River basin in Maharashtra. You see? So from 1964 to 1969, for 5 years, she conducted fieldwork in this area. And anyone who has conducted linguistic or archaeological fieldwork knows you cannot just, well, nowadays the young people are almost compelled to do so. They rush into print sometimes too quickly. But it takes a while to process your notes and to make them presentable And so it took a while, and in 1981 and 1983, 2 volumes appeared with all of the findings that she gathered between 1964 and 1969. And then, of course, we know her marriage did not last very long after that, but other things were happening in the paleontological world. This is Adrian Kortland. He was one of those people who was very gifted, a primatologist, and then was in Holland, and because he was more gifted than some of his colleagues in Amsterdam, he was driven away from Holland, and then because they were jealous. And then he became a professor at Oxford. This sort of thing happens. Anyway, he happens to be the father of Fritz Kortland, who was my, as the Germans say, Doktorvater, or my PhD supervisor. So his son became my PhD supervisor, but not in primatology, but in linguistics. And in primatology, he predicted on the basis of all of the fossil record that the hominids must have arisen in the greater Rift Valley, the African Rift Valley, this area. And then in 1966, this man, Maurice Taïb, he went down to this area. In 1968, he started conducting archaeological research, paleontological research in this area. And then he said in 1972, he submitted funding for a project, he got the project, and he said, I will invite other people to participate in the project. And it was his project. And Yves Coppens, who's the most famous paleontologist in France, basically, who died this year, just a few months ago. And Maurice Taïb, he died last year in the COVID pandemic. So, and then you have Mary Leakey, you're from the Leakey family in Kenya. And then you have a young American, Donald Johanson, and they were all invited, and someone else was invited, Gudrun Corvinus. And they were all part of a team. And it became it started in 1972, but it became a very contentious period of paleontological history. So she joined from the very outset, because the team started their work in 1972, and she was there, and she worked in the Alpha research expedition, and then they found Lucy. At the moment that they found the first little bone of Lucy, 2 people were there. Maurice Taïb and this American Donald Johanson. So they were both there, they both found the first piece of bone. And then Donald Johanson, who had been invited, said, I discovered, but actually he didn't say that right away because neither of the 2 understood the significance of this find. It was only after some time that Yves Coppens, who was the greatest paleontologist, or is recognized as the greatest paleontologist of France, understood it, and they found additional bones, and he put everything together. So in all the French media, in all the French books, in every French website, Yves Coppens is the father of Lucy, the founder of Lucy, the one who, discovered Lucy. But this American wrote this book that actually, by coincidence, I read it in Keratum 40 years ago by Donald Johanson, in which he actually names everybody else and says, but they were unimportant. And I discovered the whole thing. And so in the American media, and therefore in the English language media, even on the internet, Donald Johanson became, I am the one who found it.
Why did you read it in Keratum?
I just had it. I just had it. I was doing little, but then sometimes if I was not doing, I had to pick it. And then I just had to pick it. I had it in my baggage. So I read it 40 years ago. And then even when you read his prose, Donald Johanson's prose, you can taste it. It's a little bit, he's trying to eliminate everyone else and say my role was very great. He played a role, but so did Gudrun Corvinus. And the French people at one point said, we are leaving because this is too much for us. So some people started to leave, and one of the people that left was also Gudrun Corvinus. She left, but also there were other things going on, and you can see that here. We have Haile Selassie and this empire, Ethiopian empire, and the revolution. And it became, in 1974, it started becoming less safe for Ethiopians, but even for foreigners in Ethiopia. So she also left at this time. So that it was both inside people claiming, this is our ancestor, your ancestor, my ancestor, this is a gracile Australopithecine. This lady, she died a long time ago, and she is our ancestor. So this was, Gudrun Corvinus was also there, and she also took part in discovering parts of Lucy. So Gudrun was there, but she was not claiming, she was not claiming, I did this, etc. So here she is in Maharashtra in the 1960s, and this is a picture of her in Ethiopia in 1971, noted as 1 year before the project started. She's already in Ethiopia because she already has contact with Maurice Tailly. She's already part of the project before the American comes and before some of the other people come. So she is already at the project from the very beginning, and she's involved very actively in the discovery of Lucy. These two Indians whom I mentioned, who wrote this obituary of 3 pages, I believe, in Quaternary International, they also document her involvement with the project and her active involvement with the discovery of Lucy. So, very important. After her marriage and after this period in Ethiopia, she moved to South Africa, to Kaapstad or Cape Town, and she met a colleague of hers, Ursula Musknuk, who would be a close associate for the rest of her life. And when she finally died, Ulla, as she was called, became her sole heir, the only one who inherited anything. And not anything, everything from her. So they were very close and remained close associates, but they were both in Cape Town in 1975 onwards. Yes. From 1976 to 1980, she worked for the consolidated diamond mines in the Sperrgebiet in Southwest Africa. Now it's called Namibia, but it was actually under control of South Africa and Southwest Africa. And she was looking for diamond-yielding deposits. She published about fossils, and she also came into conflict with later De Beers, the consolidated diamond mines, and De Beers, they fused. So if you have lots of diamonds, you know about De Beers. Anyway, she lived in South Africa for during these years, worked in Southwest Africa, and she complained that many of the diamond excavations destroyed fossils. And she said these fossils are more valuable than these diamonds, these sparkly things. So she was not always popular with her employers, but she was very principled, and this was part of her personality and part of this period in her life. This is her afterwards. She began conducting field work in Nepal in 1984, and she continued her paleontological research until 2005 in Nepal. So here she is very happy in Nepal, and full of Lebensfreude. Yes, all of the places I will name, because she worked in actually quite a number of places. She didn't work only in one place. Yes, but Dang is definitely the most important, and also decisive in her decision to leave Nepal. So she worked in exactly as you said, Dang. She Hills, Dang Deukuri Dun Valley. She worked even in the Kathmandu Valley, and she worked in the Ratokola drainage in the eastern Terai. And she worked throughout a long sequence, Miocene, Pleistocene. She worked throughout all of these layers of stratigraphy and tried to really chart the Paleolithic period of Nepal and subsequent periods also. She's extremely hardworking and productive in terms of her publications. Things she wrote even in Nepali or Nepali translation, Prachin Nepal, and then in other things she wrote, many things. I kept following her publications because they were very interesting, and hardly anyone was working, or maybe other people were working, but hardly anyone was publishing as much as she was publishing. So that's very important, to make her work accessible. So here she is, working in various places, and this just gives you an impression of her as a person. And then what happened is she worked particularly, of course, in Dangdeokuri, and this, everyone has heard this story, I believe, because she was working in Dangdeokuri and she felt threatened. We all lived through this period. We know what happened in Dang. We know what happened in many of these places. She was subject to extortion, people asking money or threatening, people whom she knew closely being maimed or kidnapped or murdered. And so she said, this is not safe here in Nepal. And it is for this reason that she left Nepal and decided to continue her work, finish writing up her work in India. And because she knew Pune, she chose to go to Pune. This is the reason. This is very ironic. So she moved to Pune, and you see she moved to the Koregaon Park, which is the really luxury part of the fancy part, and you have flats like this, Koregaon Park. And it's the best places. This is just from the internet, you know. It's the hippest part of Pune. And then she was there, and then at one point she was not answering her phone after the 30th of December, and it was New Year's, and then on the 7th of January, her head was found severed from her body in a plastic bag underneath a bridge at Karadi, 12 kilometers away from her flat, and her stabbed body was found inside the flat. So it's very ironic because she left Nepal because she felt physically threatened in Nepal. And then she moved there, and then the person who actually committed the crime, he apparently had an accomplice. But this man was a 27-year-old man who was arrested, but his family was very well connected in the real estate business in Pune, and therefore he was given life imprisonment at the exorbitant fine of 11,000 rupees. Imagine having to pay 11,000 rupees for having killed someone. So, but very quickly he escaped with his wife after being given parole. He escaped with his wife, his mother, his 4-year-old daughter, and he is still on the loose. So he escaped because he has this thing which I believe in Nepali, even sometimes modern Nepali, is called power. You know, because he can exercise local power, and as a result, he was able to. And India is, of course, not the only country in the world where people get away with murder. But just to see the irony of this situation. So this is the end of her life, and it was a very promising and productive life, but just to stop for a moment at the irony. Then a year later in Hyderabad, I am in this building, and I am on the roof of this building because the wonderful colleagues, the population geneticists in Hyderabad at the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, we had a wonderful conference, and afterwards we had a big bhoj on the roof, and we are there eating really delicious dal bhat, and then this young Indian paleontologist comes to me and she tells me the whole story of Gudrun, which I had not heard, because I had followed Gudrun, but I did not know this story, and she told the whole story as I have just sketched it. And she said that the problem is her work, you know, her work is very important, and her work is going to be lost. And the police confiscated all of her work, and I had shown interest, and then immediately I became a suspect. Now I am no longer a suspect, but we have to get her work. What do we do? So I said, well, get the work whenever you can and retrieve it and then send it to Germany. And she did. She did exactly that. This young Indian woman who was with me on the rooftop this beautiful evening in Hyderabad, and she got it. And this is a year after her death. And again, just a week before her birthday would have been. So she got all of these notes, and then, press the right button, it was sent, and 1 year later, and that's a great tribute to these people, Gisela Freud and Ludwig Reich, they published in 2 volumes all of her notes, in English, in German. And I must say, this is very difficult to do. Alexander Nevsky was in St. Petersburg, and he was murdered by the communists. And his notes were published in 2 volumes after he died, simply as a photostat. Long after the Russian Revolution, long after he was murdered by the communists, under Khrushchev, when there was a period of relaxation. And those notes, people have spent over half a century working with those notes, trying to figure them out, because it's so difficult. With my own students, I worked in Bhutan on this language called Gomduk, and I gave a select group of students access to my notes, and I'm there working with them. Even then, it is difficult for my students to work with my notes when I'm explaining everything. So it is very difficult to work with someone's notes who are written actually for themselves as prompts. So it would have taken years for her to write it up as she had done with her other notes. It took many years for her to write up her own notes. And these people came out and did a tremendous job. But I can tell you from experience, these 2 volumes are extremely difficult to read. And I read them very thoroughly. And as a result, I'm going to try to present to you in a very, Sangshipt Rupma, very, very concise form, what she wrote in these 2 volumes, as far as I was able to understand from studying them. They're not easy to read. So that's press the button. Oh yes, this is the book in which I had one little article in which I mentioned Gudrun. Yes, I'm going to say Gudrun because I love Gudrun. Okay, so Gudrun's life and her research findings, and I mentioned this, and this is something Kanak saw many years ago, and this is what started us talking about it again. And then this I'm showing because time takes a long time. So when we talk about the past took so long, we're easily led into anachronisms, like Gudrun was born in Poland. Well, she wasn't, she was born in Germany. That part of the world was Germany at the time she was born. So we're easily led into anachronisms because there are so many different slices of the past, particularly when we're talking about the vast sweep of prehistory. So in understanding Gudrun's work, also we have to really segment this long stretch of time. That's why I show that. I'm going to read. Gudrun's pioneering work in Nepal yielded good stratigraphies and optical and infrared stimulated luminescence datings of key sediment layers. Based on her work at sites along the Rato Khola, south of Sinduli in Mahotri district in the eastern Sivalik, sites at and near Satpati Hill east of Bhairava in Lumbini district, and various sites in Dang and Deukri basins. The archaeological record suggests a long prehistory of human habitation. So everything that Kanak was saying is correct. But it was over a long stretch of time, so you see many people using this area as a conduit at various times in different directions, depending on how far you go back in the past. For example, the alluvial and colluvial hill wash deposits composing the Gidinia and Babai formations in the Tui Basin in Dang district have yielded abundant lithic stone material from the early, middle, and late Paleolithic periods, as well as from the Mesolithic and Neolithic periods. So in a long stretch of time of habitation, constant habitation in Nepal by peoples. An early Paleolithic presence of the Acheulean tradition in South Asia in the early Middle Pleistocene is indicated by Acheulean bifacials and flake tools industry at Gadari in Dang in the western Terai and at Satpati in central Nepal just west of the Narayani River. Alluvial terrace deposits at the Arjun site in the Badlands on the left bank of the Arjun River show Levallois technology appearing suddenly in Nepal in the Middle Paleolithic. So, next slide.
Can you tell us what Acheulean is?
Yes. You have the Moldovan, you have this long stretch of time, and then you have the Moldovan culture, which is a very, 2.5 million years ago. Then suddenly you get this flaking industry with bifacials, and that is the new industry. It's Acheulean bifacials, and then you meaning two-faced, and then they move. And the Levallois is a special stone napping technique. So this is, yes, this is the. I try not to. I took out as much technical jargon as I could, but it's hard to present her data without quite a lot of it. So this is another thing that you may have all heard of. If we take all of the old world, then we have this line named after Mr. Movius, but Mr. Movius pointed it out in 1948, but he pointed it out, as we shall see, on the basis of older literature. So he just discovered this. You have one set of lithic traditions here and another set of lithic traditions here. And one reason, I believe, and I'm not the only person who has thought this and who has written it down. Other people have also thought the same thing and written it down. Exactly along this line you find bamboo, rattan, all sorts of things to this side. So people had other materials also to work with. So you had two different lithic traditions, because here you didn't have all of the botanical resources that you have on that side of the line. So that's important, one thing. So Corvinus showed that the foothills of the central Himalayas show a complex cultural prehistory. It's not simple Nepal, it's extremely complex, both geographically, stratigraphically, and over time. Nepal straddles the so-called Movius line and represents a transition zone between two traditions of lithic stone technology, lithic expression. Sites in the western Nepalese tribe show affinity with the more occidental, the more western techno-complexes, as represented by artifacts of the Acheulean and Levallois traditions, culminating in late Paleolithic flaking and microlithic industries. The Patu culture in Mahodri district in eastern Nepal, however, stands outside of the main subcontinental context and shows clear connections with coetaneous means at the same time, existing at the same time, techno-complexes in the forested habitats of Southeast Asia. So Patu technology is characterized by cobble tools and less distinctly retouched small flake tools, and in the Mesolithic context with macroliths such as adzes and cobble tools, as well as unifacial, flat-based and steep-edged tools called Sumatra liths. You can tell where they're usually found, Sumatra liths, which clearly suggest an affinity with the Huabinian. What is Huabinian? Huabinian is, here's a map of Huabinian culture. This is Huabinian culture. You see the Movius line goes right through it, but this area is the distribution of the Huabinian culture, and it's taken from a map in this book, in this in this article by Joyce Carol White. Here's Joyce Carol White. She's in University of Pennsylvania. But the Huabinian culture was discovered by this lady, Madeleine Coligny, or identified and described by Madeleine Coligny, who went to work. She left France and went to French Indochina at the beginning of the First World War, worked there during the First World War, after the First World War, and then in 1930 she wrote her seminal work that everyone refers to, Madeleine Coligny, which is the very voluminous description of what defines the Huabinian culture. And this Huabinian culture unifies this large area that you see here in gray. So this is Madeleine Coligny, and this is Joyce White. You see there are quite a number of women who play very decisive roles in the history of paleontology. More finds by Gudrun Corvinus. Yet in later strata, later levels, the Brahuti culture in the Tui Valley, in the Dang and Deokuri Basin, preserves core scrapers and unifacial choppers manufactured by stone napping, stones when you hit the stones. Techniques that would appear to have been very particular to that area of present-day Nepal and quite distinct, again, from more occidental techno-complexes of the period. At the same time, the large flake core industry at Brahuti comprises sumatroliths, again, some high-crested and some in the shape of a horseshoe, whilst adzes of the oriental type found in Patu are lacking at Brahuti. The precise chronological relationship between the Patu culture in the eastern Sivalics and the Brahuti culture in the western Terai has not yet been clarified. There's a lot of work left to do for future generations of paleontologists. But heavy-duty stone tools would appear to have been de rigueur in the ancient forests of the Terai and the Shivalik hills. But remember, it covers such a long space of time. So this is a book that I wrote that came out last year, and which discusses, what does it say? The peopling of the world from the perspective of language, but with language we can only go back, what, maybe to the beginning of the Holocene, 10,000, 15,000 years. Genes, we can go back very far. And then material culture. And that's what Gudrun worked on. And here I try to condense most of the recent findings, and therefore Gudrun's work comes up again and again. I just want to show you a few maps, and then we conclude. These maps show the spread of Y chromosomal haplogroups, and I can show you many of the maps in this book, but I'm only showing you 3. Yes. Here we see this complex of IJK starting here in this area, passing through the Himalayan corridor, giving rise to K, very important. Many people in the room will have K, or subclade of K, maybe R or something. Here's IJ. Nowadays we have ancient DNA. We can look at ancient DNA. So we can see, for example, if we look in this area here, the Near East, we'll see that all of the older people that we find a long time ago, they have T. And then only later J comes in. And then here, if you look at the Mycenaean period on Crete, you'll find J2. And then only when the Indo-Europeans come in at the end of the Mycenaean period, you get R2. So you get all of these Y chromosomal haplogroups spreading in tandem and in time with identifiable cultural complexes. So this is what also, this would have been music to Gudrun's ears if only she could have stayed alive to hear this. So she developed a theory that the early and middle Paleolithic and microlithic traditions in the Western Terai and Shivaliks derived from contemporaneous cultures further south on the Indian subcontinent in a period still characterized by low population density, whereas the Pato culture in the eastern Shivaliks and the Brahuti culture in the Western Terai showed a later influence emanating across the Himalayan foothills from Southeast Asia in the late Pleistocene and Holocene, with the archaeological record suggesting an increase in population density at the end of the last glacial maximum, roughly coincidence with the flourishing of the Brahuti culture. And again, this is what we see with the spread of K haplogroups and K subclades going through the Gangetic plain, and particularly through the Himalayan corridor. And of course, many K subclades become very important because of one of these K subclades is R, ultimately. Next, here's more K subclades. You see all of these groups moving through, very important groups moving through, because K2A becomes an extremely important ancestor to other clades, moving right through the Himalayan corridor. So all of this we see, and it corroborates her work. More, these groups that went on to enter Siberia, populate Europe, all going through the southern Himalayan corridor, which is why people look the way they do. Yes, we look the way they do. This is why we look the way they do, because of these ancestries. So the sub-Himalayan corridor, this area, and if you look on any climate map and you look at when it is too hot and when it is too cold, and then where you have the Goldilocks temperature, which is always just right, in Nepal you always have places that are always just right, and they're in this corridor where we see all of these Paleolithic traditions coursing through this area. This is the best place to live, because there's neither here nor there. You can live in both places, and people do, but this is the best place to live, and all of us can attest to that. That's why we are here. So we see that there's a snug fit. I say snug, but actually we don't know everything yet. It's like this population genetic and linguistic data with the material cultural findings of Gudrun and her colleagues. And that's what we have to do. Future future generations have to follow in her footsteps and continue this tradition, because Nepal is so incredibly important, not just for the prehistory of South Asia or the prehistory of Nepal, but for the prehistory of the whole world outside of Africa. So this is really a key area. All of our ancestors come from here at one point.
Thank you, George. What a story of human evolution, and what a humane story about Gudrun, and how you related it to your own work. And there will obviously be questions and comments. तर म एउटा कुरा अहिले भनिहाल्छु। तपाईले एउटा कुरा के गर्नुभयो भनेदेखि प्रमाणित गर्नुभयो कि यो हिमाली भेकमा एउटा शब्दको प्रयोग छ, बेयुल। त्यो चाहिँ नि बसोबास भइसकेपछि पछि जसलाई कोही कोहीले सङ्ग्रिला भन्न रुचाए, बेयुल हो। तर हामीले बुझ्दाखेरि चाहिँ नि बेयुल चाहिँ नि गएको 2-3 हजार वर्षको सन्दर्भ होला। तर तपाईले भन्दाखेरि त यो त बेयुल त प्रागैतिहासिक रहेछ। And that's in a way gratifying in these very difficult times, and in the current times भन्ने भनेदेखि आज भोलि पनि यहाँहरु सबै हुनुहुन्छ, हामी चाहिँ नि आज भोलिकै डिस्कोर्स संकथन कुराहरुले पनि we are moving from प्रत्यक्ष to समानुपातिक to प्रत्यक्ष to समानुपातिक, त्यो अवस्थामा हामी यहाँ छौं। And you've done us such a favor by taking us out of it into not history but prehistory. तपाईलाई धन्यवाद।
यो 3 सालको जस्तो लाग्छ कुरा है। म 5 साल बित्नुभयो। मैले अप्पर अरुण भ्यालीमा माइक्रोलिथ्सहरु पाएको थिएँ चान्स फाइन्डिङको रूपमा। मेरो त्यहाँको अप्पर अरुण भ्याली र तमर भ्यालीको कल्चरल स्टडिज थियो। अनि त्यहाँ माइक्रोलिथ्स त्यो चाहिँ नि नियोलिथिक टुल्स एरोहेड्सहरु पाइयो। त्यसको न्युज आयो निकै, सिनासबाट हामीले त्यसलाई प्रचार पनि गर्यौं। अनि हाम्रो पुरातत्व विभागका साथीहरूले सानोतिनो लेख्नु पनि भयो त्यसमा, मैले पनि इन्टरभ्यू दिएँ। अब नेचुरली यो हाम्रो गौडुनलाई त्यसको असर परेछ र 3-4 पटक मलाई फोन गरिकन सी केम टु मी इन साबे। दुईटा मर्निङमा बिहान आउनुभयो। त्यो यो लेख्ने कुरामा एडिसनल होला, उहाँ कति चाख लिनुहुन्थ्यो। र भर्खर दरबारजीले भन्नुभयो नि म्युजियममा एक्जिबिसन गर्नु पर्यो डाक्टर ढुङ्गेल, अब तिम्रो त्यो ढुङ्गाहरू पनि मलाई दिनु। अनि हामी सबै त्यहाँ त्यो मेरो पनि राखेर नेसनल एक्जिबिसन गरौँ भनेर प्रपोज गर्नुभयो। द्याट वाज 2003 अथवा 2004 को हो। अनि म आई ह्याड टु गो ब्याक टु लन्डन है। अनि कन्ट्याक्टै भएन, एकैचोटि न्युज त मैले सी पास्ट अवे इन बम्बे हो कि कता त्यो आयो खबर कुनामा, त्यो ज्यादै दुःखद भयो। र अलिकति मलाई चाहिँ कस्तो भने मलाई पनि त्यो सेन्टिमेन्टल बनाउनु भयो कि उहाँले। भेटेको त मेरो धेरै होइन, उहाँको पढेको आर्टिकल धेरै हो। त्यस हुनाले उहाँको संस्मरणमा त्यो एउटा मेरो पनि त्यो एरोहेड्सको अध्ययनको क्रममा उहाँले एक्जिबिसन गर्ने नेसनल एक्जिबिसन त्यो भएन छ। अहिले भर्खर यहाँ हाम्रो कल्चर डिपार्टमेन्टको धेरै समय हेड भएको सोधिन्थ्यो, त्यो भएन त्यो एक्जिबिसन। अब ती एक्जिबिसन गर्न सकिन्छ कि मेरा पनि ती स्टोन्सहरू अझै छन्, त्यो कसैले गर्यो भने त्यो चाहिँ आई वुड लाइक टु ब्रिङ टु द म्युजियम अर सो वेयरएभर। त्यति कुरा उहाँको त्यो अध्ययनमा त्यो थपिनुपर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ एउटा पाठ। धन्यवाद।
एकदम गजब कुरा भन्नुभयो रमेशजी। र जर्ज जोडेको तपाईकै सुझावलाई अगाडि बढाउँ यही कोठाबाट। मेरो सुझाव जर्नालजी हुनुहुन्छ, कल्चर डिपार्टमेन्टको साथीहरू हुनुहुन्छ, यहाँहरूले तल चिया खाने क्रममा यो बक्सामा रहेका टिनका बक्सामा रहेका सामग्रीलाई बाहिर ल्याएर सुरक्षा सहित एउटा एक्जिबिसन गरेर इन्टरप्रिटेसन सहित जर्ज पनि यसमा मद्दत गरि नै हाल्ला। व्हाट डु यु थिंक जर्ज अन आइडिया that just came forward from Ramesh?
I think this is an excellent idea. I think also what is very important in the history of archaeology, when we look at the discussions in the literature, they always refer to the site names. So we talk about the Hallstatt culture, the Latin culture, which is a very specific place in the lake in Neuchâtel, and we talk about the Huabinian culture. The names of the sites in Nepal that I discussed, already we found Rato should be Ratu. We have to find the original names because she wrote them down in her notes. These were then sent to Erfurt in Germany. These two German scholars put the German into the English, and not knowing Nepali and not knowing the Nepali place names, wrote as best they could, looking from her notes. We have to get the precise names in Devanagari as they are written, so that these important site names, which lead a life of their own in archaeology, that they are correctly represented and that we have the correct Nepali names for these site names. It's very important.
Well, as we are now working and printing the third volume of Geology of Western Nepal of my father, also including Dam Valley, and we have a big problem about the mapping, because he used the map of Survey of India, and even now with the new maps of the department in Nepal, most of the names have changed. So if you could find out what kind of map she used, or maybe even we can one day we can work together, or I can send you a map of the Survey of India, because this map was printed in 28 and I think reprinted in 38, and you don't get it anymore.
म राजेश परियार, आर्कियोलोजी अफिसर। हामीले चाहिँ नेसनल म्युजियममा स्पेशल सेक्सन नै बनाउने हिसाबले चाहिँ सुरुवात गरेका छौँ, कोर्भिनस सेक्सन भनेर। यहाँ तपाईहरुले चाहिँ फाइन्डिङ गरेर टुल्सहरु देख्न सक्नुहुन्छ। यति मात्रै भन्न चाहे। बक्सामा चाहिँ थन्केको छैन, तपाईले हेर्न सक्नुहुन्छ।
पत्रकारले लेखिदियो, तपाईले बताइदियो। देवेन्द्रजी कहाँ हुनुहुन्छ? तपाईको के भन्नु छ देवेन्द्रजी? जानु होला। यो थाहा भएर जानु होला तपाईँ। हैन, देवेन्द्रजीले के थियो मिठो गरी एफिसिएन्टली त्यो न्युज पठाइदिनु भयो र बाकस पनि एकदम गजब बुझ्ने एकदम ढ्याके बाकस छन्, हलचल गर्न नसक्ने खालको। प्लिज।
मलाई एउटा मात्रै अलिकति खुल्दुली लागेको, यहाँ उहाँको ज्यानको चाहिँ खतरा भएर उहाँ जसो जानुभयो नि, but what was the cause? I mean, why was she murdered? I mean, that way. मलाई चाहिँ एकदमै
Yes, I didn't talk about that in detail, but actually the Koregaon is really, all of the properties there are very hot, and they are still hot properties in Pune, and she had a nice flat, and this man, this 27-year-old man, wanted to compel her to sign an akhtiyari that basically had her surrender the flat that she had paid dearly for, so that he was into real estate deals. So he was a real estate wheeler and dealer, and when she refused, well, you see what he did, and then he made away with him, and he was connected to the real estate mafia of Pune. So that's how it happened. It was because she had a very desirable room.
आज हामी यसरी भेला भयौँ। जर्नलिस्ट भ्यान ड्रिमलाई धन्यवाद कि 2-3 वर्ष अगाडि लेखिनु भएको कुरा उहाँले पनि छोड्नु भएन, द्याट यो महत्त्वपूर्ण कुरा हो, गर्नुपर्छ भनेर। र तपाईँको प्रस्तुतिले जर्ज, अहिले जर्ज जी भनौँ तपाईँ भनिसकेपछि, जर्जजी अहिले धेरै नयाँ नयाँ कुराहरू पनि यिनै भयो र हामीले अगाडि हेर्दाखेरि नयाँ पिँढीलाई पनि शब्द धेरै चलाइन्छ, त्यो नयाँ पिँढी नभनौँ, आउने दिनको लागि एउटा प्रदर्शनीको कुरादेखि लिएर अझै धेरै गुड्रुनकै त्यो कामको अनुसन्धान बढी त्यो सामग्रीको, त्यस्तै न्यू एराज अफ प्यालियोन्टोलोजी। अब हामी कहिले कहिले अलिकति उही दाङ राष्ट्रवाद जस्तै नेपाली राष्ट्रवाद पनि छ है, नेपालमै रहेछ भनेर त्यसलाई राम्रो तरिकाले मोडेर अनुसन्धानतिर लगाइदिने हो भनेदेखि मलाई गजब लागेको। I'm so thankful for that one satellite imagery you have of the swathe of the Himalaya across the Bay of Bengal, over Bengal, and त्यो ठाउँ यस्तो रहेछ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ नि मैले चाहिँ यताबाट उता गएको मात्रै कुरा गरिरहेको थिएँ, जसले त यहाँबाट नै प्रस्फोटनमा कुरा गरिदिनु भयो। त्यसैले लट्स फर अस टु लर्न फ्रम यु रविन्द्रपुरी।
धन्यवाद। सर्वप्रथम त म कनकलाई र जर्जीलाई धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। आज यति महत्त्वपूर्ण कुराहरू सुन्न पाइयो र धेरै कुरा आइसकेको छ। म अब आफ्नो अनुभव मैले गुरुजुनजीको बारेमा त अब धेरै सुनेको थिएँ, दुर्भाग्यवश उहाँसँग भेट्न सकिनँ। तर उहाँको बुक चाहिँ जर्मन एम्बेसीमा लन्चिङ भएको थियो। अनि त्यो लन्चिङ हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ सौभाग्यवश हाम्रो शुक्रसागर दाई पनि हुनुहुन्थ्यो। हाम्रो रिमाल सरलाई देखिएन आज, म उहाँ यहाँ हुनुहुन्छ भन्ने ठान्थेँ, किनभने गुद्रुनसँग एकदमै नजिकसँग काम गर्नुभएको चाहिँ रिमालजी हुनुहुन्थ्यो। उहाँ चाहिँ मेरो विचारमा खाने विभागमा काम गर्नुभएको थियो जस्तो लाग्छ उहाँले, र उहाँ रिटायर भइसक्नु भएको छ। मेरो विचारमा उहाँलाई भेटेर उहाँसँग पनि इन्फर्मेसनहरू लिनु एकदमै महत्त्वपूर्ण जस्तो लाग्छ, किनभने त्यति बेला लन्चिङ हुँदाखेरि उहाँले धेरै कुराहरू भन्नुभएको थियो। दुर्भाग्यवश शुक्रसागर दाइ त हामी माझ हुनुहुन्न र त्यो बुक लन्चिङ हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ उहाँ हुनुहुन्थ्यो। र अर्को कुरा हाम्रो परिहारजी चाहिँले खुसीको कुरा सुनाउनु भयो। हाम्रो देवेन्द्रजीले त्यो आर्टिकल लेखेको चाहिँ 3 वर्ष अगाडि हो। 3 वर्ष अगाडि चाहिँ ती कुराहरू बक्साभित्र नै थिए। अब सायद उहाँकै आर्टिकलले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ अब यो पाइला चालियो जस्तो लाग्छ। र जे भए नि यो एकदमै राम्रो पाइला हो। र अर्को कुरा चाहिँ अब हाम्रो दाङबाट मित्रहरू पाल्नु भएको छ। जुन दिनदेखि दाङ चाहिँ राजधानी घोषणा भयो त्यो दिनदेखि नै मेरो चिन्ता के छ भन्दाखेरि ती कुराहरू चाहिँ नष्ट होलान् होइन। अब तपाईँ दाङमा बसेका मान्छेहरूले जस्तै तपाईँले भनिहाल्नुभयो दाङ कति महत्त्वपूर्ण भन्ने कुरा त तपाईँले आज थाहा पाउनुभयो होला। त्यस कारण चाहिँ ती ठाउँहरूमा चाहिँ त्यो नष्ट हुन नदिने जिम्मा चाहिँ तपाईँहरूकै जस्तो लाग्छ। हामीले गर्नुपर्ने साथ सहयोग त हामी गरिहाल्छौँ। र अर्को कुरा त्यो किताबको कुरा गर्नुभयो तपाईँले, त्यो दुइटै किताबको दुइटै भोल्युमको स्क्यान कपी चाहिँ मसँग छ र कसैलाई चाहिन्छ भने म त्यो उपलब्ध गराउन सक्छु।
त्यो दुर्गा रिमालजीको कुरा अरे हो तपाईँ? रिमाल
म यति भनिदिउँ कि लीला रिमालजी चाहिँ उहाँ महान्द्रजीले भन्नुहुन्छ कि अमेरिकामा हुनुहुन्छ, त्यसैले अहिले यहाँ नहुनु भएको, नत्र त पक्कै हुनुहुन्थ्यो। र यही कुरा तपाईँलाई भने पनि आउनुहुन्थ्यो अरे पक्कै पनि, र कन्ट्याक्ट गर्नुभएको थियो उहाँले। हजुर तपाईँ कल्चर डिपार्टमेन्ट
अर्को रिमाल हो।
नमस्ते, मेरो नाम मदन कुमार रिमाल हो। म त्रिभुवन विश्वविद्यालयमा पढ्छु र मेरो प्यासन पनि हो कि यो एन्सियन्ट हिस्टोरिकल हेर्नु। मैले यसमा अहिले हजुरले भन्नुभएको हिमालयन रेन्जको जुन तपाईँको भागहरूको कुरा आयो त्यसमा मैले अलिकति थपाउँ भनेर थप्नु खोजेँ। मैले पूर्वी नेपालको प्रिहिस्ट्री भनेर आर्टिकल लेखेको थिएँ हजुर डिपार्टमेन्टमा, प्रिहिस्ट्री अफ इस्टर्न नेपाल। त्यसमा गुड्रुन कर्निवसको धेरै लेख पनि गरेँ। त्यसैले मलाई धेरै क्युरियोसिटी भएपछि म 3 दिन अगाडि ती पूर्वी नेपालको सबै क्षेत्रको प्रिहिस्टोरिक साइट भनेर आएँ।
भर्खरै?
यस, 3 दिन, 1 day 3 days हो। त्यहाँ जो हजुरले भने हिमालयन रेन्जको तल चुएको भएको छ नि, मैले खालि त्यसमा अलिकति थप्न मात्रै खोजेँ कि जस्तो त्यसपछि कमला नदी आउँछ, रातो नदी पछिको उता सबभन्दा ठुलो कमला इस्टर्न सिराज जिल्लामा पर्छ। त्यहाँ एउटा खप्टे डाँडा भन्ने ठाउँ छ। त्यो चाहिँ 2058 सालमा मैले चाहिँ डिस्कभर गरेँ म सेल्फ। र मलाई फेरि शङ्का लगाएर म अस्ति पनि गएँ। त्यहाँ स्टोन टुल्स पाइएको छ, हेर्नुहोस् है, त्यही रेन्ज हो, त्यो रातो फलाको रेन्ज हो। अनि त्यसपछि म बेलबारी गएँ। बेलबारीमा बेतना भन्ने ठाउँ छ, सेम रेन्जमा। त्यहाँ चाहिँ नि अहिले पनि मेरो स्टुडेन्टहरूले अस्ति स्टोन टुल्सहरू कलेक्ट गरेको छ। जङ्गलभित्र छ, तर कोशीको रेन्ज र त्यो कमलादेखि उता कोशीदेखि उतापट्टि मेचीसम्म का साइटहरूमा एक्सप्लोरेसन भएको छैन राम्रो। त्यसकारण उहाँले जुन प्रेजेन्टेसन गर्नुको पछि लास्टमा गएर हिमालयन रेन्जको जुन देखाउनु भएको छ त्यो धेरै इन्ट्रेस्टिङ छ र म पनि त्यसमा एग्री छु र त्यसैबाट मैले पनि सूत्रपात गरेर गुड्रुन कर्निवसकै प्रेरणाले हुनु न सो विभिन्न पूर्वीय साइटहरूमा मैले घुमेँ। त्यसपछि हाम्रो मुस्ताङको तलको रेन्जमा हाम्रो रमेश सरले पनि गर्नुभएको छ। मैले पनि 50 सालमा गएर एक्सकर्सनमा पार्टिसिपेट गरेँ हुँ जर्मनी टिमसँग। त्यहाँबाट पनि स्टोन टुल्सहरू धेरै पाइएको छ। मोहन सिंहलामा हुनुहुन्थ्यो, उहाँ पनि गर्नुभएको छ होइन। त्यसकारण हामी यही फिल्डको भएकोले केही बोलौँ भनेर मैले चाहिँ अलिकति थपिदिएँ हुँ। सो धन्यवाद। सो इट्स भेरी इन्ट्रेस्टिङ प्रेजेन्टेसन्स। सो थ्याङ्क यू भेरी मच।
तपाईँले छलफलमा थपिदिनु भयो।
म चाहिँ काम गर्ने नै हिसाबले हिँडिरहेको छु।
अझ गरौँ। थ्याङ्क यू सो मच नेपालजी। हामीले long have I written, sorry for my voice, that the Himalaya, mid-hills of Nepal are the most highly densely populated mountain region of the world. तर अहिले हेर्दा paleolithic टाइममा पनि मोस्ट हाइली डेन्सली हुन जस्तो देखियो। Only we need more paleontological study. अर्को एउटा कुरा हामीले विगतका अतीतका कुराहरू ट्रेजेडिजका कुराहरू पनि गर्ने सन्दर्भमा आज दुईजना नाम आए। म उहाँहरूलाई सम्झन चाहन्छु। घरिघरि उहाँको नाम आयो, तारानन्द मिश्र, शुक्र सागर श्रेष्ठ। हामीलाई पहिले उहाँहरू जस्तो हस्ती पनि नभएको खर्किन्छ। तर यहाँहरूमध्ये फेरि उहाँहरूको चाहिँ थाम्ने गरिकन अगाडि हुनुहुन्छ नै। मेरो भनाइ यति मात्रै कि आउँदा दिनमा अझ बढी नेपाली बौद्धिकहरूलाई उत्साहित गर्नलाई हामीले भनेको त्यो एउटा एक्जिबिसन गरौँ या भइसकेकोलाई प्रचार गरिदिउँ। के गरौँ भनिदिनुहोस् तपाईँको विषयमा।
सरकारी अथोरिटीले नै गरेको हुनाले अथेन्टिक काम पनि भइरहेको हुनाले सायद
होइन ठ्याक्कै अहिले कुन अवस्थामा छ एक्जिबिसन र सबै राखिया छन् कि गुड्रुनको आउटपुट कि कुनै त्यो सबै बताइदिनुहोस्।
उहाँको नै हो हुनलाई, तर सबै चाहिँ भएको छैन डिस्प्लेमा। सुरुवात भएको छ एउटा सेक्सनको रूपमा चाहिँ सुरुवात गर्ने हिसाबबाट सुरुवात चाहिँ भएको छ र तपाईँले स्याम्पलको रूपमा चाहिँ देख्न सक्नुहुन्छ बवासी अनि त्यसपछि जिउस्टाङका विभिन्न साइडहरूको सिलेक्सन गरेर हामीले चाहिँ डिस्प्ले गरेका छौँ।
र तपाईँहरूको इनिसिएटिभ यति राम्रो काम भइ नै सकेछ। पहिलो कुरा त हाम्रो साधुभाव र चाहिँ नि धन्यवाद यहाँहरूलाई अघि न
कर्तव्य हो सर।
हजुर होइन, अब आउँदा दिनमा त्यसलाई नै अगाडि बढाउनलाई यो कोठामा हामी जति छौँ त्यो बाहिर नाम लिस्ट पनि छ। पहिलो कुरा तपाईँको त्यो स्पेसल अब गुड्रुन कोर्भिनस कक्ष नै भन्ने हो भनेदेखि त त्यो ओपन गर्ने क्रममा त धुमधामै गर्नु पर्ला नि। हामी सबै तपाईँको साथमा छौँ।
सर खास के हो भने 3 वर्ष पहिला पब्लिस भएको रहेछ त्यो कान्तिपुरमा। सायद त्योभन्दा पहिला पनि डिस्प्लेमा भएको थियो केही आइटमहरू, सायद यसरी प्रचार भएको थिएन होला, बाहिर आएको थिएन होला। कारण के हो किनकि नेसनल म्युजियममा नै डिस्प्लेमा छ। अहिले चाहिँ हामीले अलिकति भोल्युम बढाएको छौँ। अब त्यो हाम्रो त्यहाँको अहिलेको जुन स्पेस अनुसार हामी सुरुवात गरेका छौँ। सुरुवात त पहिले पनि भएको, फेरि थप गरेका छौँ भन्नुपर्छ। बिस्तारै त्यो स्पेस अनुसार वृद्धि विकास होला।
Thank you. George, some last words from you because okay. त्यो बाकसको चाहिँ अब कुरा
आर्टिफाक्टहरू खोज्ने त छँदैछ। त्यो सँगै पोलिट ग्रेडहरू पहिला कुन प्लान्टहरू त्यहाँ थियो, उनीहरूले के खान्थे, ती काम गर्ने मान्छेहरू थिए। वस्तुत विभागसँग अब कुनै उसँग तपाईँको कन्ट्याक्ट हुन्छ कि हुँदैन, सम्पर्क भएर काम हुन्छ कि हुँदैन। किनभने त्यो के अरे गौतम बुद्धको खन्दाखेरि पनि सबै त्यो उत्खनन भइरहेको छ। इकोलोजिकल त्यो विभिन्न पार्टहरू हेरियो, पोइन्ट ट्रेन त्यहाँ पहिला के खान्थे, के वस्तुमा केही जानकारी आयो, त्यो टाइपको छ।
सर यसको बारेमा मभन्दा हाम्रो मभन्दा सिनियर म्याम हुनुहुन्छ, उहाँबाट
यो त वर्कसप हुनाले
वास्तवमा राजेशजीले मलाई देखाउनुभन्दा पुरस्कारलाई देखाइदिनु राम्रो हुन्थ्यो किनभने म चाहिँ अहिले नेसनल आर्काइभ्समा छु म धेरै वर्षदेखि नै नेसनल आर्काइभ्समा छु एज अ कल्चरको स्टुडेन्टको हिसाबले चाहिँ केही जानकारी उहाँले भन्नुभयो जस्तै जुन गर्नुपर्ने थियो त्यो रिलेसनहरू के खान्थ्यो कसो खान्थ्यो भनेर तर फ्याक्ट कुरा भन्ने हो भने त्यो चाहिँ भएको छैन जस्तो मलाई चाहिँ लाग्छ है त्यो भएको छ भने राजेशजीले क्लियर गरिदिनु होला त्यो त्यसरी अब त्यो टुल्सहरूको बारेमा चाहिँ रिसर्च भएको छ होइन टुल्सको बारेमा तर त्यसरी जुन कम्पेरिटिभली रिसर्च चाहिँ भएको छैन जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई जानकारी धन्यवाद
सरी राजेश अनि सञ्जीवनी दुई वाक्य
यो कार्यक्रमको लागि यहाँलाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद गुन्द्रुनको बारेमा थोरै सुनेको थिएँ आज धेरै थाहा पाएँ यो हाम्रो लागि चाहिँ उहाँ स्वयं उहाँ नै हाम्रो पुरातात्विक महत्त्वको व्यक्तित्व हुनुहुँदो रहेछ होइन आज थाहा भयो एउटा मेरो मलाई चाहिँ सानो कौतूहल त जागेको चाहिँ त्यो प्राचीन मान्छेहरू हाम्रो यही बेल्टबाट किन हिँड्थ्यो होला भन्ने धन्यवाद
सञ्जीवनी देन विल टेक
नमस्कार सबैजनालाई सबैभन्दा अगाडि कनक सर र जर्जलाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद अगेन म वाइल्ड लाइफ कन्जर्भेसन नेपाल भन्ने संस्थामा काम गर्छु यो आउने हप्ता नै मेरो एउटा कार्यक्रम लिएर म दाङ पनि जाँदैछु आई हेभ बिन वर्किङ देयर तर मलाई अहिले कस्तो लाग्यो भने आइ एम अल्सो फोकस्ड अन एजुकेसन र म पढ्ने बेलामा चाहिँ प्रिहिस्टोरिक नेपालको यो त काहीँ पनि पढेको छैन अहिले पनि छ कि छैन थाहा छैन I have spent last 15 years in making local curriculum, developing local curriculum based on local resources. र दाङमा चाहिँ हाम्रो त्यो कार्यक्रम पनि छ र म चाहिँ के चाहन्छु भने दाङमा धेरै म्युनिसिपालिटीहरू छन् त्यो ठाउँमा कसरी यो कुरा लाने र दाङको भाइ बहिनीले आउँदो पिँढीले नयाँ पिँढीहरूले कसरी आफ्नो यो कुराहरूलाई अपनत्व गरेर नेसनल स्केलमा कसरी गर्न सक्छ भन्ने मलाई चाहिँ कौतूहलता सुरु भएको छ र I've already envisioned a book for all children of Nepal and probably all children of the world to show this. Thank you so much.
All roads lead to Dham.
यहाँले भन्नुभएको कुरा मलाई धेरै आवश्यक लाग्यो दाङको मान्छेको कर्तव्य छ अब त्यो संरक्षण गर्ने किनभने all of these sites they have to be left intact नचलाइकन because all of these levels they have to be left intact so that later people can do the calibrated dendrologically calibrated radiocarbon datings from what they find. They can do a proper stratigraphy. The paleontologists themselves from the Puratata Vibhag who will come and do the work, but it is the duty of the local authorities to protect it so that later the accelerator mass spectrometer datings can be done and thermoluminescence and everything can be done. But then the sites have to be left intact. So when these are discovered, please leave them intact for the specialists of the Puratata Vibhag and don't disturb them.
Pollen studies.
Pollen studies, paleontological studies, yes, also very important. And wildlife. Yes. Some way.
Ancient wildlife.
सानो कुरा थप्न मात्रै खोजेको अहिले हामीले मेरो नाम लीलानाथ शर्मा म बोटनिस्ट हो कमल सरसँग बेला बेलामा कुरा गर्छु प्लान्टहरूको बारेमा होइन अनि मैले अहिले एड गर्न खोजेको के भने हामीले मान्छे आएपछिको केही हजार वर्षको कुरा गर्दैछौँ अहिले होइन तर दाङको स्टडी चाहिँ के छ भने मान्छेको उत्पत्ति हुनेभन्दा पहिलाको त्यहाँको म्याक्रो फोसिलहरूको स्टडी भएको छ र त्यसमा चाहिँ के देखिन्छ भने अहिले एक्सटिङ्क्ट भएको धेरै प्लान्टहरू दाङमा भेटिएका छन् है र त्यसको केही रिलेटिभहरू हाम्रो इस्टर्न नेपालमा अहिले पनि छ होइन त्यही प्लान्ट होइन कि त्यसको क्लोज रिलेटिभहरू छ होइन र इन्डियाको बिरबल साइन्स इन्स्टिट्युटले धेरै राम्रो स्टडी गरेका छ र अहिले त्यस्तो राम्रो पेपरहरू देखिँदैन होइन तर धेरै राम्रो म्याक्रो फोसिलहरू भनेको मान्छे त्यहाँ आउने भन्दा धेरै अगाडिको इन्फर्मेसन छ म्याक्रो फोसिलको तर गुड पेपर वी क्यान फलो देम
के लाग्नु थाल्यो भनेदेखि यो प्रान्तको राजधानी होइन कि नेपालको राजधानी दाङ जाओस्
I think given the फ्याक्ट कि दाङको स्थानीय पनि होइन अनि त्यसपछि फोटो पत्रकार पनि उहाँको वाच डग गिभन द फ्याक्ट कि वर्षाजीले भन्नुभयो होइन दाङको स्थानीय अनि त्यसपछि मलाई यत्रो जानकारी भयो भनेर गिभन द फ्याक्ट कि उहाँ चाहिँ फोटो पत्रकार पनि हुनुहुन्छ उहाँ निगरानी गर्ने मात्रै होइन वाच डग गरेर यस्तो भइरहेछ भनेर जानकारी गराउने पनि गर्न सक्नुहुन्छ
Hello, namaste. I'm Priya. I used to do wildlife research. So, मलाई चाहिँ के छ भने humans are also animals, right? So we probably followed this because it was best for us, but we were also probably following animals that we were eating and stuff. So, like pollen grain and habitat and stuff. Also, when the climate is changing, obviously a lot more animals are probably also going back and forth from this channel. And if we are going to make it wholesome while looking at like what we were eating and stuff, even the other animals that are moving back and forth from this corridor at that time, I feel like it can be such a much more wholesome kind of research. And even with that diet, with stone tools, what were we eating, what were bones. And my daughter is like recently into fossils, so I really want to know about fossils and who's doing discovery of fossils because she's really into it now. And where do I go to show her? Or who's doing research, whose work I can follow? So yeah.
What you say is music to my ears because I'm so happy that you and your daughter will be carrying on the work of Gudrun Corvinus.
एकदम मिठो मिठो कुरा आएको हुनाले र कहिले पनि यो कोठा नछोडे हुनाले
त्यति बेला देवेनजीको आर्टिकल आएपछि एउटा राम्रो काम पनि हुन लागेको थियो के भन्दाखेरि त्यो जस्तै त्यो देवेनजीको आर्टिकल लेख्नलाई मसँग त्यो किताब भएको नाताले मैले उहाँलाई धेरै इन्फर्मेसनहरू फिड गरेको थिएँ र पछि चाहिँ हाम्रो दाङको संस्कृत विश्वविद्यालयको मैले उपकुलपति हो कि रजिस्ट्रारज्यू के अरे खोज्दै मका आइपुग्नु भएको थियो र त्यति बेला चाहिँ यो जस्तै यो जुन त्यो म्युजियमले जुन त्यो बाकसमा थन्किएर राखेको चिज नै संस्कृत विश्वविद्यालयमा लगेर त्यहाँ एउटा त्यो म्युजियम नै बनाउने र त्यो गुद्रुनजीले उत्खनन गर्नुभएको ठाउँलाई एउटा पार्ककै रूपमा डेभलप गर्ने भनेर चाहिँ कुराकानी एक दुई तहमै अगाडि बढिसकेको थियो इभन त्यसको लागि फाइनेन्सियल सपोर्टको कुराहरू पनि हुन थालिसकेको थियो तर त्यति बेलाको त्यो राजनैतिक उथलपुथलले गर्दाखेरि त्यो कुरा चाहिँ सेलाएर गयो म फेरि दाङवासीहरूलाई अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु होइन त्यो चाहिँ एकदम राम्रो आइडिया थियो र त्यसमा चाहिँ अगाडि बढ्नु होला अब हामीले गर्ने सहयोग त हामी गरिहाल्छौँ
सरले भने जस्तो दाङ राजधानी हुँदै गर्दाखेरि यी कुराहरू मासिन्छन् कि भन्ने भनिराख्नु भएको थियो त्यति धेरै त मलाई त्यति बेला थाहा थिएन जब यो निर्णय भयो कि दाङमा प्रदेश 5 को राजधानी बनाउने भन्दै गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ म पर्सनली मलाई आफूलाई चाहिँ खुसी लागेको थिएन किनकि दाङको अहिले स्ट्रक्चर जुन छ दाङमा मान्छे जसरी बसिरहेको छन् त्यहाँनिर तुलसीपुरतिरको पश्चिमतिरको एउटा पार्ट छ घोराईतिर एउटा पार्ट छ भने देउखुरीतिरको एउटा पार्ट छ हैन अब भनौँ न एसियाको सबैभन्दा ठुलो उपत्यका भन्दै गर्दा काठमाडौँभन्दा पनि ठुलो हो त्यो होइन अनि भुटोलको जुन सिनारियो छ एकैचोटि त्यहाँको चिजहरू दान गरेर सर्दाखेरि एकदम क्राउड हुन्छ र एकदम धेरै हामीलाई डिस्टर्ब हुन्छ भन्ने जस्तो मलाई लाग्थ्यो अहिले तपाईँहरूले र यो प्रोग्रामबाट मैले धेरै कुरा थाहा पाइसकेपछि मलाई लाग्छ कि त्यो बाहेक मैले सोचेको बाहेक भन्दा पनि धेरै कुराहरू छ जुन चाहिँ अब मैले साँच्चीकै आफूले चिनेको होइन चाहे त्यो नेताहरू होस् चाहे त्यहाँको लोकल अफिसहरू होस् जुनसुकै होस् होइन या त्यहाँ साथीहरूसँग पनि होइन कुरा गर्नुपर्छ जस्तो चाहिँ मलाई लाग्यो तपाईँले भनेको संस्कृत विश्वविद्यालय जुन हिसाबले त्यहाँ अलिकति हुनुपर्ने थियो त्यो त्यसैमा पनि अलिकति गर्न सकिएको छैन अब राजधानी सर्नुमा पनि सबैलाई थाहा छ त्यो राजनीतिक एउटा खेल नै थियो भनेर होइन म सक्ने आफ्नो कोसिस गर्छु
धन्यवाद कोही पनि हात नउठाइदिनु होला एकदम उत्साहका साथ तल चिया खाने क्रममा गर्नु होला तर एउटा कुरा बाँकी छ मैले यहाँ लामाजी चाहिँ नि तल गुड्रुनसँग घुम्ने गर्नुहुन्थ्यो उहाँलाई केही बोलिदिनुहुन्छ कि भनेर बेटीज्यूको आग्रह मैले सोधेँ तर उहाँले मलाई एकदम मन दुख्छ त्यसरी म गर्दिनँ जस्तै रिताजीले नै जसरी भन्नुभयो त्यसले उहाँहरूलाई धेरै धन्यवाद आज कष्ट गरेर आइदिनु भएकोमा सम्झना दिलाउनलाई त्यस्तो आत्मीयता तपाईँहरूले धेरै नबोले पनि हामीले बुझ्यौँ त्यस्तै रातो खोलाबाट चाहिँ नि केदारजी पाल्नुभयो उहाँलाई चाहिँ नि आज बिहानदेखि नै यतासम्म आउने कष्ट बोल्दा बोल्दा मिटिङ यहाँ मेरो यता भ्याइदिनु भयो यहाँलाई पनि धन्यवाद सबैजना यहाँ अब भोलिका दिनमा नेपालको प्यालियोन्टोलोजी बारेमा अनुसन्धान गर्ने कोही हुनुहुन्छ भनेदेखि यसको बारेमा कविता लेख्ने पनि कोही हुनुहुन्छ यता स्नेह सायमाजी हुनुहुन्छ है आइम ट्राइङ टु इन्डिकेट द स्पेक्ट्रम द्याट वी हेभ हियर है अब डाङ भ्यालीको त कुरै नगर्नु है अब लास्ट वर्ड फर George, there was a question which was left unanswered. Why were people using this corridor? What is so special about it? And I think perhaps you could come ahead with some conjecture.
There are a number of reasons. Some of them are climatological, others are epidemiological because diseases that you have in the plains that you do not have in the mountains. So there are epidemiological reasons and topographical reasons and yes, floods. And then also what you have is, as you were saying, rich habitats for game, for hunting, and you have many, many diverse habitats. And you can move seasonally with very great consequences, just moving up a few hundred meters and down a few hundred meters. So there are numerous consequences, but that is it in a nutshell. Ecological, game, plants, climatology, and especially epidemiology.
So we have talked about an exhibition, a children's book, not forgetting wildlife, all kinds of things. Let's go down.